So I talked a bit of shit about Dark Souls 3 a little while back in one of my videos about Dark Souls 2, and I don't really know why I did that, because I actually like this game a lot. Specifically, what I think is the strength of Dark Souls 3 as a game is just how like ridiculously cool it is. I weep for all the metalhead teens growing up in the 1980s who never had a chance to play this game, because this game is fucking sick. Like in a way that's unique to itself among the other Dark Souls games and kind of among the Souls series with the exception of Bloodborne, I think. I think Bloodborne is the only one that particularly challenges it. I'm going to go ahead and just start off by talking about the first area here, the Untended Graves, and kind of just comparing how this game plays out compared to some of the stuff you see in Dark Souls 1 and 2. It's weirdly something I don't think people talk a lot about is how wildly different in tone Dark Souls 3 is from Dark Souls 1 and 2. Like Dark Souls 1 and 2 are already pretty different games, but Dark Souls 3 is like radically different. People like to talk about like, oh, Miyazaki is back when this game came out, but like this game has like very little in common with Dark Souls 1. I don't necessarily think that's a big flaw. The only thing it really has in common with Dark Souls 1 is just like plot elements like yo Gwyn is in this, yo Gwyn has another kid, yo Gwyn has a pet dragon. I think that's like the weakest part of this game. I think the lore of like all the shit they try to bring in from Dark Souls 1 is pretty weak. And especially it's weak just because there's so much going on in this game that's rad as hell. Like look at the Untented Graves here, like this that like sheet of like that ray of just gray miserable light pouring through, just so much of it to set the tone for this game, but also just this infinite array of tombstones everywhere is so much more dire than even the undead asylum. Like Dark Souls 3 is like a full-on like heavy metal music video start to finish. Everything in this game is like so much more like goth and emo and just like grim and cool than anything in Dark Souls 1 or 2. Like Dark Souls 1, despite itself in a lot of ways, is this very reserved game. I think it reminds me a little bit of like the Seventh Seal, like an Ingmar Bergman movie. Dark Souls 2, meanwhile, has a sort of fantasy vibe to it. Like, okay, like let's compare this guy here. So this is just an optional enemy in the tutorial area who's probably going to own me. I haven't fought him in a while. You get a reward if you kill him. He's not actually the tutorial boss. He's optional. Compare this to the same type of enemy in Dark Souls 2. Dark Souls 2 has this big ogre troll thing because like Dark Souls 2 is almost like a grim fairy tale compared to Dark Souls 1 or 3. It's like a little bit more like whimsical and a little bit more fantastical. But like this thing's all sharp edges. He's like shooting out like crystals from his breath and kill you. It's actually the really funny thing is that this is like a grim reimagining also. It's like a dire, evil reimagining of just like a common gameplay feature from these games. Those little like crystal lizards you see on the ground everywhere. This is one of those all grown up. So it's like even just taking like a very kind of cutesy little monster from the first game, this little pinata lizard, and it's just turning it into something like so much more like dangerous and deadly. I love it. I think it's awesome. It's totally out of there. It's like completely different from the other two games, and I don't necessarily think it's better or worse. I just died, by the way. I don't think it's better or worse, really. Uh, but it is cool. And like I said, I wish there's like teenagers in the 1980s who I wish could have played this game. This is rambling, but it's my video, so fuck you. I think the Crystal Lizard, I'm skipping ahead a bit in the tutorial, but I think the Crystal Lizard speaks to something that's sort of a theme in Dark Souls 3, where everything is bigger and stronger and scarier than it was in Dark Souls 1 or 2. Like, look at how big the world here is. You can see these huge-ass mountains in the distance in this skybox, but also if you turn around and look behind you, you can see the high wall of Lothric, actually, the place you go to after this, just sort of looming behind you in the distance there. That's actually the first level you go to after the tutorial, but look how massive it is, and just compare this in your mind to the Undead Burg. Like, it's night and day how different it is, and it plays to an idea where in Dark Souls, and I'm going to get to this with the boss, Gundyr. I think Gundyr really, like, sells, like, the idea I'm getting at here. So in Dark Souls 1 and 2, you're kind of, like, told a lot, basically, that, like, you're only succeeding because everyone in the world is at the end of their rope. Like all these gods and stuff are just dying and rotting away, and they're at the low point of their power. They're all just the final boss of Dark Souls 1 is just a sad old man hiding, like a sad old man who's just sort of like hiding from the future, right? You're basically executing him. That is not the case in Dark Souls 3. In Dark Souls 3, everyone is at the absolute peak of their power, and they are going to do everything they can to crush you into a million pieces. I actually lose this attempt at the boss fight, so I'm skipping ahead where I succeed and do cool things. But like, look at the second phase here. Like, Gundyr is already going out at you, and you do find later that, yeah, he was also, like, in a weakened state. But look at Gundyr in his weakened state. He's, like, leaping around the boss arena, and he's, like, turning into this giant sludge monster. And you're fighting him surrounded by just, like, a million tombstones of other undeads who have failed. This is so fucking cool. This is badass. What the fuck? Like, compare this guy to the fucking Asylum Demon. The Asylum Demon is scary when you first meet him, but once you get your weapon, once you like do the initial escape and get your weapon, it's not that hard to actually defeat him. Like, you can see right here, like, half his health is basically finished off by the plunging attack, just so they can tutorialize that. And then it takes me roughly 20 seconds just to wail on him a bit. If he didn't do the jump attack, I would have probably just gotten it within, like, 15 seconds even. See, there you go. You know, the last giant, he's probably even more pathetic. You just sort of stab his ankle until he dies. At one point, he rips his own arm off to use as a club. Like, this is an enemy who's like, this is a mercy kill more so than a boss fight, right? Like, this isn't testing you. This is just an obstacle in your way. Contrast that shit to Gundyr, who is like specifically there to make sure that you understand the fundamentals of the game in universe. Basically, this is like not an enemy to be trifled with. I've gotten a little bit off track with where I was going on this, because this is just a rambling video by nature. You know, it's not really about anything. But this does kind of like lead into sort of a general difference in Dark Souls 3 from 1 or 2. And I'm going to skip ahead now past Gundyr and Firelink Shrine and all that to make my point. There's this sense in Dark Souls 3 that the world is both more dead and maybe more alive than it's ever been before. Like, you know, this is the end of time, right? We're here, we're jump cutting into the high wall of Lothric. This is the end of the universe. Like, you know, the sky looks like it's just sort of draining dead. You just see these trees growing out of corpses randomly. Just these big dead dragons everywhere. This is like the most grim the world has ever seemed. But also, like, everything kind of feels more like it's out to get you, and like you specifically. So, like, I'm going to skip ahead a little bit here, even more so. But like, look at these guys. These guys are walking just freely around, which gives a little more dynamicism to the dungeons. They sort of like gestured at this in Dark Souls 2, Scholar of the First Sin, where they had some of the hollows like doing things independent of you. But in Dark Souls 1 and 2, for the most part, dudes just stand still and fucking wait. You get the impression, really, that, like, this world is just sort of ignoring you, that you're just going through it and happening to, like, trigger these hostile entities. Whereas in Dark Souls 3, the hostile entities are seeking you out. Like, they know you are the invader. You're the last, like, line of light here. They want you dead. A fun way to illustrate this is probably the dragon attacks in the opening areas of Dark Souls 1 and 3. So in Dark Souls 3, you come down here, and this guy is just ready to fucking go. He drops on top of you, fire breath on everyone there. Like, he just killed all those NPCs for me, actually. It's pretty tight. But, like, there was no time to breathe there. If I didn't know it was coming, I probably would have died. It's pretty brutal. There's no warning there's a dragon here. The world just wants you dead. But isn't that really cool as hell that this guy just swoops down to fucking kill you? Then you fucking go into the little area underneath him. You think for a second that, like, oh, hey, well, I had the guts and I ran through the fire and flames. Now I get the reward, right? You see this treasure chest here. Fucking wrong. It's a mimic, bitch. Like, that's the first treasure chest in the game, and it's a mimic. So, like, you just got out of the fucking fire and into the frying pan. There is no freedom. There is nothing to get out of here. Contrast that to the Hellkite Drake from Dark Souls 1, which the game does have the Hellkite Drake to straight up jump you after the Taurus demon, but they give you a warning that it's there first. It swoops down and kind of just ignores you and passes through. Just sort of gives you a nice little jump scare, but doesn't actually do anything. I think it's just, like, definitely gives the tone. This is a much more hostile world in Lothric than in Lordran, which is surprising because, you know, Dark Souls is the game that has the reputation for being brutal and unforgiving. And, you know, like, Dark Souls does a lot of mean shit. Like, right down here, you can see, like, the Black Knight is just hiding in this little alleyway, and if you come down not expecting it, he's just going to turn around and fucking obliterate you in one go. But generally, the impression you get from these is all just that these powerful beings are just, like, living in the world. They're waiting. You just happen to come by, and you happen to be strong enough or persistent enough to destroy them. Like, I'm going to use the first boss in both areas as an example here, the Taurus Demon and Vort. So the Taurus demon is a pretty tight enemy, but you do get the impression that he just lives here. Like you just happen to be walking on his bridge, and he flipped his shit and decided to go and get you out of here. He was here independent of you, and he'll be here once you're gone, unless you kill him. And later as you go through the game, you also find out that as cool as he is, he's like a small fry. He fought his way out of Lost Izalith, which is pretty cool if you think about it. But in Lost Izalith, there's a million Taurus demons. He's a dime a dozen. He's just a big fish in the Undeadburg. But where he comes from, he's a mook. And later you'll fight these guys without boss health bars. Now I'm going to go ahead and compare him to Vort, the first boss you fight after the tutorial in Dark Souls 3. Now there's no cutscene for the Taurus demon, he just jumps down from that tower and fucking gets you. But what I love about Vort, like watch this clip here, he comes out of this evil portal of like shadow and ice and smoke and mist. Isn't that just like the coolest fucking thing ever? And he's this big fucking beast tonight, like he's in this big suit of armor, but he walks like a warthog and he's just crawling straight towards you. You did not happen upon this guy. This guy was not living in the high wall before you came here. This guy is hunting you. Someone sent him here to get you. Like, they do not want you to advance. The level of, like, import of your character in Dark Souls 3 is very different. The world is out to stop you. Like, you have a mission that the universe does not want you to fulfill. Listen to this music. What the fuck? This is basically the first boss of the game. The game keeps finding ways to one-up this moment as well. Like, this is not like, the last time this happens by any measure. Watch this cutscene right here where you meet the dancer for the first time. The dancer is basically just right across the street from Vort, actually, but you're more likely to come across this area later in the game unless you're trying to do some sequence breaking. But, like, watch, the door slowly closes as you're left in this dark room, and then you just see dripping as this dark sludge and rains down from the ceiling. Isn't this the coolest shit in the world? I love how quiet this is, but like the sword is on fire. Like this shit is metal. Look at that. This is an album cover. Like this fight should have like fucking Powerwolf or some shit playing over it, but unfortunately I'm not gonna like follow through on that bit. I am just probably going to die here. Unfortunately, Sad Hulk is not quite a high enough level to fight the dancer, and the Homeward Bone I thought was in my inventory was not there, so whoops. Listen to that music there, though. Also, you can see just a little bit, very briefly at the end there, how the whole church starts to catch on fire once the dancer's fire damage starts being done to the environment. How tight is that? This game does not stop being cool. Like I mentioned earlier in Dark Souls 1, the Black Knights that are kind of like sporadically hidden throughout certain areas. But like enemies like the Black Knight are just all over the place in Dark Souls 3. Like look at this dude, this like souped up knight in like this heavy ass plate armor about to kick my ass. That's just a common enemy in this game. It's mandatory to fight these guys early on. Like the stakes are just so much more escalated in Dark Souls 3, and it maintains itself throughout the whole game really, all the way to the end. I'm going to basically consider the Ring City to be the end of the game for the sake of this, because in my mind, it's where the franchise ended off, so it's kind of the last word on what Dark Souls is. Alright, jump cut. The Ring City, here it is. This is literally, in the world of Dark Souls, the end of all time. Look at that shit, just non-stop, like all eras, all locations, all of space and time collapsed on one moment. I love this layer of soot that's on everything in the Ring City, like the whole place is just burnt up. There's really nothing left of this place or of the world, like this is really the end. It even catches your fall. Also, in addition to everything being made of like soot and ash, all the enemies are just like these weird things made of just slime. They're all just made of goop and like tree branches and bark and just shadow. It just hits this odd sort of middle ground that I really like, actually, where everything is both like decrepit and dying, just more dire and like close to the end than it's ever been, but also somehow more scary and threatening than ever before. Like, check this shit out as I'm climbing up these steps. You can see there's like this bleeding sun off in the distance. Just the sun itself dying, and then this massive, like, worm tree branch ogre thing without a head. His head is just this little blob of shadow, leaps down from nowhere to kill me, but I turn the fucking tables. I do a plunging attack into the fucking orb of darkness. How is this not the coolest thing ever? The Ring City is almost like a Kaizo mod for Dark Souls 3. Like, this game, like, it does not relent even a little bit. Like, here we go, we finish that guy off, we come here, get this item, we're feeling greedy. Suddenly you're falling from 1,000 feet along with this corpse into the side of this church. But you landed in the magic circle, so it's okay. But wait, it's not okay. There's fucking evil wizards summoning zombies around here, and they have sickles, and they're trying to cut off your ankles. Like, what the fuck? There's no breaks. I kind of love it. Even if I kind of also hate it a little bit, because, God, I wish I could, like, stop and enjoy the roses just a little bit. Take the plunge, jump off another big fucking cliff, here you go. There's more items there. You feeling greedy? Go get them. Oh, that was a bad idea. There's angels firing laser beams at you. There is no moment where this stops. And the angels, as you find out when you progress a bit further, they're actually being controlled by these fucking, like, husk worm creatures. You know, just... Here you go. This H.R. Giger looking just corpse that just flails at you pathetically is the thing that's actually controlling this, like, horrific entity above that hatched from it like a butterfly out of a cocoon. The sun is bleeding, by the way. I can't get over that. There is so much imagery going on here. It's leaning into the berserk ideas and motifs so hard. The dead pilgrims everywhere, just non-stop enemies emerging from sludge and slime. You are being hunted. You are being followed. You are never going to escape. This is your punishment for, I guess, buying Dark Souls 3 and being a little freak. Jump off another cliff. You're in Dark Souls 2 now. But don't you think for a second you're out of the woods, you little bitch. You absolute fucking worm. Guess what? There's more of them. You have to keep running. You have to keep running. Don't you fucking stop. They're right here too. You're in a fucking poison swamp being shot down by lasers. This isn't even the same angel. This is a second one that's like 10 yards away. The sun is still bleeding. Look at this. It's... What's going on? I got it. You have to keep running. You have to keep running. I have to keep running. I gotta run.